Except that I would have added a few more names to your last list. But, I mean, I can't stand to listen to any of those bastards. But
I'm with you.
I think, you know, you were talking from a national perspective, and I think about that from the Montana perspective. And I think that part of what happens, and I think you're right, Brian, we are more tolerant than maybe, well, certainly than people inside the Beltway. But I have to fault the news media to some extent for paying way too much attention to all that kind of garbage and not paying attention to good or maybe better principles of citizenship or principles of government. You know, I don't think, with the exception of, what was it, the legislative session before the last one,
Right.
I don't think that there's been the kind of rancor in Montana that we've seen in D.C. But I do think that it you know, it rubs off on us. And maybe that's what happened during that session. It was a little bit better, well, quite a bit better during the last session. But hearing and watching all that bashing, I mean, you've got the Republican Party and the Democrat Party, they've both hired, nationally now I'm talking, they've both hired these political strategists that are very aggressive and teach people to be very partisan. And I think that's too bad. I think that's too bad, because what it should be about is good government and figuring out, as you say, the answers to some of these difficult questions in concert as representatives of the people, and let's do it together type of thing.
Let me ask you your experience. You're a state senator, you had extensive experience in the legislature. It's a part-time legislature, meets every 2 years, and now it's term limited. We face the same problems as a state as every state in the United States. We're in the 21st century. This is complicated stuff. Do you feel that institutional structure is up to the challenges we face? Some people say it's...
How much time have I got?
You got 30 seconds to answer that one. Yes or no? No, but seriously, some people say this is amateur hour faced with professional caliber problems.
A lot of people say that, and I guess I would say that I'm not too bothered by having biennial sessions. I'm not sure 90 days is quite long enough, but I'm not too bothered by having annual sessions in a small population state like Montana, where we have a large legislature, really, 150 people. I mean, that's way more than the California legislature is. I forget what it is, but I think the total is right around 100. And here we are with 150. Although we got a lot of miles to cover. But you know, there is one reform I would like to see, and that would be to have a special budget session. And I don't know if you want to get into that or not. It might take some time, so I won't go there unless somebody wants to ask me about it.
We'll see if people want to ask about that, but we'll do that.
But the term limits thing is, I think, a wreck. I think it's a terrible thing that was passed. I think it's a terrible thing to keep. I also think it's something that we're stuck with. What term limits does is it destroys institutional memory, for one thing, because you got nobody there. I remember when I was a freshman legislature and I went over and I thought I had a great idea, and I talked to some of the old guys about it, guys that had been there a while. And they said, well, you know, it's not a bad idea, but they tried that 5 years ago, and here's what they're really up to. And I thought, oh my God, I've never thought of that. Well, you've lost that. You've lost that institutional memory. Another thing you've lost, I believe, is diplomacy. You know, diplomacy is not something that you inherit. It's not something in your genes, something that you're born with. It's something that you learn. And it takes a while to learn it. And you got to be around diplomats in order to even think about it, let alone learn very much about it. Statesmanship, diplomacy. Well, term limits got rid of all the statesmen. I remember most of the time that I was in the Senate, Senator Chet Blaylock from Laurel was a very liberal, very principled Democrat from Laurel. And everybody respected him. Everybody, I mean, he and I disagreed a lot because he was very liberal. But I respected him every moment of every day. And people referred to him as the conscience of the Senate. And he was in a lot of ways. And now I ask you, who is the conscience of the Senate or of the House? Or is that a topic that's even thought about? People are not there. Government is complex, let me tell you. Even our little $7 billion state government, little, $7 billion, I mean, can't imagine that. But it's extremely complex, and it's not the kind of thing you learn in your first 90 days. I mean, hell, it takes longer than that to learn where all the bathrooms are in the Capitol. Government is very complex, and you've got, term limits is just, it's just a wreck because you've lost statesmanship. Another thing that you've done is think about who's there all the time. Who is there now for the 18, 20 years instead of some of the legislators? And the answer is the lobbyists and the bureaucrats. Now, you know, a lot of people don't like lobbyists. I'm a defender of lobbyists to a large extent, not totally. But the bureaucrats, and what is the tendency of any bureaucracy? I don't care if it's a state government, city government, a corporation, a US government, whatever. To grow, right? To grow. To come up with a bigger budget next year. And when you have a legislature that doesn't understand very much about how all that works, we are destined for bigger budgets, and we are destined to tip the balance of power greatly towards the executive branch. And I don't think that's good.
Let me ask you one question before we go to the audience. The other aspect of the political process is the citizenry that elects folks. And last night we spent a lot of time talking about the state of the American citizenry, and Pat's highlighted some of the issues we talked about, the inflammatory news media and the polarization of the American public, which has played out around health care. What's your sense, both of you, and I'll start with Pat, for the state of the citizenry in Montana? Acceptance of the responsibility to be informed, have opinions, and also specifically to come together as opposed to one set, you know, the environmental groups meeting together, talking with each other, the stockholders talking with each other, the loggers talking with each other, and never focusing on their shared values and common goals. Where are we in this state in terms of citizen attitudes?
We're fragmented by various groups, all of which have a purpose, and most of those purpose in the minds of their members is an excellent purpose. I'm like Lawrence, I think I defend lobbyists some because they're your representatives. Students at the University of Montana have lobbyists in Washington, D.C. working on their behalf. They don't know it, but they have lobbyists that get them guaranteed student loans and so on. That leads to a little fragmentation. Many of the membership groups, be it on the right or left, on the industry side or the environmental side, though, have created a lot of fragmentation of Montana's, political civility and political understanding over the past years. None of them trying to do it. I don't think they're purposely trying to misinform Montanans. It's just that, you know, they're dealing from a different set of facts, and they're dealing from what persuades them. And as a result, we've become a people who don't know the truth anymore, right? Including me. I mean, what the hell is the truth anymore? You see all these facts out there by people presenting them to you. In short, it does seem to me that Montana is suffering from what all states are suffering from, and that is a balkanization of opinion regarding public policy. We are balkanized. And while there's some good in that, some obvious good in opinion and having people out there trying to deliver to you the facts, it seems to me that so many of those groups are so insistent and so angry and in such need of new membership that they sometimes inflate the danger, you know what I mean, that it's not good for us as a people trying to reach a solution, trying to give our representatives running room. So let me make a prediction. I think politicians never make predictions, but I guess I'm not a politician anymore, so I can do it. I can now be wrong without worrying about it, in other words. I think we've seen the high point in that balkanization. I personally think that Americans, maybe not over the long pull, but for the near term, 20 years, are going to start coming together. I think we've had it with the rabble-rousers, and that we're going to start pulling together. We'll see. I sure hope so.
Lawrence, what's your sense for that?
Well, I'm not sure I'm quite as optimistic. I am as optimistic regarding Montana. I'm not sure about
Yeah, let's talk about Montana.
regarding the country. Actually, I see in Montana a shift, I think, that's already begun and has actually been going on quietly, I would say, for several years. We were talking at dinner tonight about the Big Hole Watershed Committee. Now, there's a group of redneck ranchers and what should we call them?
Green Neck Environmental.
Okay, Green Neck. I was searching for a little more.
I knew you were, that's why I jumped in.
That have been working together to try and they've done a lot of very constructive things in the Big Hole Water Basin, trying to deal with the water issues there. In Sweetgrass County, perhaps the most conservative county in the state, or at least at one time it was, which is where I live, we now have we have two watershed groups. One is just starting up, and it happens to involve the streams that I live on. And we're meeting, we're talking, we've got some grant money to, look at the stream and recommend improvements. We're talking to Trout Unlimited, and, 20 years ago, I mean, forget it.
Right.
And it's not just watershed type committees, it's other committees that are working in communities around the state, trying to get people to come together. So I think that some of that has started, and like I said, I have more optimism, I think, for Montana than nationally. Just kind of in that context, I do want to make just a little follow-up to my previous diatribe, having to do with the I don't know, the partisanship type stuff, the Rush Limbaugh type stuff, the what's the guy's name on MSNBC?
Ed Schultz? I don't know.
Keith Olbermann.
Yeah.
Did you see him the other night, his first night back?
Out of prison, was it?
I don't know, back from, I think it was some family tragedy or something. I'm not really sure what it was, but he was as bad or worse than I've ever seen Rush Limbaugh, on the opposite side. But anyway, I really think that the press ought to be held to a higher standard. And I think, now that's a tough a tough campaign to go on nationally. But I don't think it would be that tough in Montana. I mean, we have chosen to live here, and it's not that big a state, population-wise. I mean, we can do better. We can insist on better, it seems to me, from our press. And I think that would go a long ways to help the kind of thing that we're talking about.
Interesting.
Although I would like to add that I think our press is better than the press you and I are primarily complaining about. I think the press
agree.
in Montana is much better than
I agree.
Although not as good as it should be anymore either. The newspapers,
Well, maybe I shouldn't say
Tom
the
knows,
press.
the newspapers aren't quite as good as it
Maybe I should say the editors, because they're feeding all this national diatribe to all our daily newspapers.
On that note, let's see what you'd like to say. So what we'd like to do is we'll have questions, comments, and to keep it moving, if you can just kind of, while one person is asking their question or making their statement, just raise your hand, and then when the question's finished, I'll wander over there. This is a sensitive mic, and I have to be careful about making bad noises with it.
Okay,
I'll hold it.
okay. I'm John Porterfield from Whitefish. Thank you again for coming together. My question would be related to the youth of Montana. We lead the nation in the highest rate of suicide the highest rate of teen meth use. Other things like the least number of two-year graduates. Places like the community of Troy, where about 75% of the kids don't go on to higher education. I think statewide the average is about 50%. We graduate about 7,000 students a year